Subscribe and click the notification bell, and I'll give you the only functioning life jacket left on the ship. Lakes are like great big wet hiding spots in plain sight. You might be lying along the shore looking out over the water, but you can't see most, if not all, of what's underneath the surface. So, what's looking back at you? What's waiting for you to turn away or close your eyes to drag you down into the depths? Well, today we find out. These are allegedly true scary stories from down by the lake. If you want your story to be featured on this show, you can share it with us at darknessprevails.org, or just stop by to read thousands of true scary stories. Up close and personal with the Great Salt Lake Demon. From GraveyardGoku. Location, Utah. To this very day, I haven't told this story to anyone in person. My loved ones simply think that I had a decompression accident during a routine diving trip, but that couldn't be any further from the truth. I don't dive anymore. Back when I was in the Mormon Scouts, it was basically all I did. We even had an inside joke where they would call me Holy Diver in reference to the 1983 Dio song of the same name. It's not like I was being bullied or anything. Actually, I quite like the nickname and the song as well, since I still listen to it regularly to this day. To get to the point, I had convinced our scoutmaster that we should go camping near the shore of the Great Salt Lake. Even though he said no many times, saying it would be too dangerous, he eventually buckled, under the condition that I was not allowed to dive in it. At the time, I had no idea what could be so dangerous about that lake, but now I think I know better than anyone. The bus ride to the campsite was uneventful, save for my best friend at the time throwing up. We all had a good laugh about it, but he seemed to be in genuine pain, so we apologized for laughing. He had to be picked up by his mom's boyfriend, since his mom didn't have a driver's license and his dad was at work in the tire factory. To this day, I still think about how he was the luckier one of the two of us, despite it not seeming like that at the time. I mentioned earlier that my scoutmaster, Evan, made me promise that I wouldn't dive on the trip. As you probably already guessed, I did not heed this advice. I had smuggled all my diving gear with me in my big brother's sports bag, which was much bigger than mine, and thus was the only one that could carry all that gear. I still don't know why Scoutmaster Evan was so afraid of going into that lake. I mean, maybe he did know something lurked down there, but he simply didn't have the courage to tell anyone. That's definitely a feeling I can relate to. I never got to ask him though, because not long after this story, he passed away. Anyway, it was the middle of the night. Everyone else had gone to sleep. Since I had brought my diving light, the darkness did not serve much of a problem to me. I snuck out to the shore and I began to gear up. I can still remember the dark reflection of my wetsuited teenage body in the waterside. Somehow I felt like I had done something wrong, like I had sinned for breaking my promise to Scoutmaster Evan. But I had come this far, so it was time to jump in. It was beautiful down there. I believe that's why that thing inhabited those waters. Even inside the cruelest beasts, there must be some semblance of beauty. That has to be true for all God's creatures. At least that's what I try to tell myself. I was examining a rare stone, or one that appeared to be rare, when I suddenly felt a pressure on my back. My first thought was it was some kind of turtle. This is what I assumed because I felt claws. I didn't get a good look at it, but I saw scales and bright red eyes, like a demon. I don't know any naturally occurring animals with red eyes, not underwater, leading me to freak out and believe that that's what it was. When I turned my body to face the thing, it didn't take longer than a moment to realize this was some sort of nightmarish entity that spat in the face of normality, and I knew that I was in its territory. I remember screaming, one of the last things you should do when you've got a respirator on. And as if my body was acting on its own, my hand lurched forward and I slammed the flashlight in its face. It seemed disoriented after that, if only for a second, giving me time to start panicking and swimming back up. The waters were so dark, but suddenly I could see some light emanating from the surface. It looked like Scoutmaster Evan's form. He appeared to be in a rowboat. He had discovered that I was gone, probably suspicious and knowing that I would have disobeyed him. He had gone out to look for me. Hoping that monster would not dare come to the surface, I had a second wind and I swam faster than I ever had before. But then I felt a sharp, burning, stinging sensation down my back. I let out another scream, now completely out of air. Luckily, I broke through the surface in a matter of seconds, and I was climbing on board his rowboat, a massive claw mark on my back. I told him I accidentally swam into some rocks, all the while cringing in pain. I don't think Evan believed me. To this day, I don't know if it's because he knew about the demon, or if he knew I was just a bad liar. But back then, I didn't care. I just wanted to be back on solid ground as soon as possible, and for the rest of the trip, I was too scared to even look in the direction of the lake. After getting back home, I soon sold all my diving gear, all except for the wetsuit itself, because of the massive rip in it along the back. Even today, after all this time, I haven't gone diving again. Humanoid fish creature. From HighbeardThePirate. Location unknown. It was the summer of 2018. My friends Vin and Marco and I went to a lake to camp and fish. When we got there weren't a lot of other people, which we really liked. Vin was making a fire while me and Marco caught fish to eat. I was enjoying it, and so was Marco. That is, until he pointed out something unusual. I looked toward where he was pointing, and I saw it too. Something on a different shore of the lake farther from us. It vaguely had a human shape, but it had scales and eyes like a fish. I couldn't see much beyond that because of the distance. I could tell that it was sitting on what appeared to be a log, and after a few minutes it got up and walked into the nearby woods. Marco and I told Vin about it, but we all agreed that it was probably some psycho in a costume trying to mess with people. Later that night, we all hopped into the back of my van and started streaming some funny shows, which I was hotspotting from my phone. Eventually, Vin and Marco fell asleep. With a yawn, I put my laptop and phone away, and I began to doze off as well. Around 2 in the morning, I was awakened by some strange noises. There was no mistaking these sounds. It was like someone trying to open the passenger door to the van, which, for this very purpose, I always make sure it's locked. I got up and looked to see who or what was trying to get in. When I looked at the passenger window, in that still near silence, my eyes widened and I felt my breath catch in my lungs. It was that creature we had seen on the lake shore, that half-fish, half-human looking thing, the one that I had foolishly assumed was just a prankster in a costume. This was no costume. I had a better look at it now. I saw its hand on the windshield, a hand with webbed fingers. I saw gills on its neck. It opened its mouth to reveal tiny yet sharp teeth. There was no way this could be a costume. The creature kept trying to open my passenger and driver's side doors, and even tried the back doors to the van, which needs my key to open, thank God. But then it climbed on top of the van, searching for any possible way to get in. It was desperate to get in at us. We were its focus. If we hadn't had the van around us, sheltering us, I don't know what it would have done. I am not entirely sure what it wanted, but I had a vague idea, but I did not want to find out just to be sure. I was on my own here, because the noises never woke up Vin or Marco. Somehow they slept right through it. The thing kept at it till 5 a.m. I looked at the windshield and saw that it was walking into the lake. When the sun came up, and it couldn't come up fast enough, Vin and Marco finally arose. We got out of the van to stretch, but I was searching for footprints, which I quickly found. I pointed them out to Vin and Marco, most notably the webbed features. There were also dirty hand and footprints all over the outside of the van. I told them what happened, and with the evidence around us, they couldn't deny it. We all agreed not to spend another night there, so we left shortly after. Fishman, let's not meet again. Paranormal Madness from Devon. Location, upstate New York. So, I live in a house by a lake in upstate New York, and I've lived there for almost 7 years with my family. What we experienced happened in 2016. We're not churchgoers and we don't have a religion, but during the time before everything happened, my mother was obsessed with Illuminati things, videos, books, and the like. After some time when she stopped all this, things got weird around the house. One night we all decided to watch a movie in the living room. It was during the winter of 2016, the start of January. My mother was walking into the dining room to turn off the light there. When she turned, she saw my brother's closet door slowly move. She began to freak out, asking us to come over to see if we could see it too. I immediately said yes, being in awe at what I saw. I could feel my eyes start to water in fear. It felt like something was right in front of us moving those doors. My older brother Dominic had the idea to put a video recorder on the stand close to the hall that enters the dining room to see if we could catch something doing this. We all couldn't keep our eyes off the doors because they wouldn't stop moving even after we saw it. Later on, after checking the recording, we didn't catch it moving the doors on video, but we did get some weird audio sounds, like breathing noises, like a grown man making a panting sound. I remember seeing the door move again, and I approached it at one point, just to see what I'd feel, but I didn't get far before something said, "Run," and I listened. I never got goosebumps so bad. One morning when everyone had left for work and school, I was home by myself. It was around 11 a.m. and I was doing dishes, when a crow suddenly slammed against the kitchen window, nearly making me soil myself. As I went to see if it was okay, another hit the window, then another. I was so horrified that I hid in the living room until everyone got home. The following day, I was home with my older brother and he was asleep. I decided to play some music while cleaning the dishes again. On my way out of the kitchen, something unplugged the stereo. I figured one of the cats ran by and accidentally unplugged it, but that wasn't the case, because when I looked around, they were all three sleeping on my mom's bed. I plugged the stereo back in and went back to doing the dishes, but maybe 2 minutes later, it happened again. This time when I checked the plug, it was still in the wall. This time someone had clicked it off, though my brother was still asleep and no one else was around. Creeped out, I just left the music off. I had some laundry to do, so I did it in silence. As I was folding clothes, I noticed the stair ramp was broken off. That's when I noticed that something was moving the stair ramp. I quickly finished up, and I simply sat next to my brother waiting for him to wake up. On another occasion, my neighbor Jimmy, which was my friend's uncle, came over. He was sitting in the kitchen drinking some coffee, when out of nowhere, he screamed and banged his leg on the table. He gripped at his calf, saying that something bit him. But at that time, the cats weren't even in the house. We pulled his pant leg up, and he showed me the bite mark. Lo and behold, there was a fresh and painful-looking mark on his leg, one that didn't match the mouth size of a cat anyway. What was even weirder was when he came back the next day, the mark was gone, as if it had never happened. One night when I was about to sleep, one of my cats was sleeping just a bit above my head as usual. I soon began to smell this terrible stench. I thought maybe it was the cat. I looked at the time, seeing that it was 3:20 a.m., and even after making the cat get down, the smell lasted another 2 hours before going away. I don't know what's happening at our lake house, but it's not good. I think it wanted to end me. From LookBehindU. Location, New York. 3 years ago, while I was working and staying at a farm in upstate New York, I had a very creepy encounter with some type of strange being. The farm I worked at was located in a beautiful valley between two densely forested mountains, which also had a stream that flowed into a small lake from a reservoir about 3 miles up the road. Every so often, after a long day working, I would stroll down to the lake and relax as the sun went down. The water was beautiful as it usually was, and sometimes in the evening as the cold mountain air moved in, it would create this spectacular fog that floated right above the water. Watching this mesmerizing scene while I sat on an old beach chair, it would take the stress of work away and rejuvenate me for the following day. One evening, I decided to stay out for a little while longer and built a bonfire. A thunderstorm had rolled through the area a few hours earlier, so it was pretty difficult getting one started, but I finally did. I sat there for an hour gazing at the embers and listening to the crackling sounds. Everything was so peaceful, so quiet. Anyone who lives or spent time upstate during the summer could testify to its natural beauty and wonder. It was about time for me to get back home at that point. It was about bedtime, so I began making my way up the path that ran alongside the lake. There was a right turn at the end of it, and a climb up a small hill which led to where I was staying. There were also many rounded stones on the ground, so I'd use my phone light to guide me so I wouldn't trip over one and fall. I was almost at this turn when suddenly I heard a loud splash. I heard sounds that came from the water before, but it was usually a beaver that is gathering material for a beaver dam. But this splash, it was extremely loud. I stopped where I was and turned my flashlight toward the water. It looked like something had just jumped in, something big, but I couldn't see what or where it was. I stood there for a moment waiting to see movement, but the water didn't move. I was about to turn around and continue on my way when suddenly, something glistening across the lake caught my eye. I moved a little closer to see what it was. There, standing at the edge of the lake, was this dark figure. It was at least 8 feet tall with a pair of large glowing eyes. Eyes that I now realized were following me. I froze. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this massive rock came flying my way. Its aim was a bit off, so it landed in the water right in front of me, causing a huge splash. Seeing this, I booked it out of there at a pace I've never run before. I got back to my place shaking and out of breath. I told the owner of the farm what I saw, but he thought I was out of my mind and didn't believe me. A minute later, he grabbed his 12-gauge and told me to come down there with him to check it out. I was still freaking out, but my curiosity got the better of me. Also, he had that 12-gauge, so surely I'd be safe going back. I walked with him back down to the lake, and I showed him where I saw it. We didn't see it at first, but he quickly noticed it himself after moving the flashlight around. There it was again, just standing, staring at us in silence. He threw the flashlight into my hands and pointed his 12-gauge at it. Boom, he had already taken aim. The creature let out this nauseating screech that sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard, then fell back into the darkness. We stood there, both of us now shaken up, but we waited. We had to make sure that it didn't come back, and it didn't. So we made our way home after that, and that was it. I couldn't sleep for most of the night and had plenty of nightmares for a few nights after. The farm owner later told me that he went across the lake the next day and searched the area. He found a small trail of dry black goo. He believes it's from the thing. We spoke about it many times after that, and it became a spooky ghost story that we told people around the farm. Deep down, though, I imagine it's still out there, still roaming those woods. Champ C. Champ from Silverwolf69. Location: Lake Champlain, around Vermont and New York. During a basketball tournament for amateur teams, my team, the Reading Rough Riders, had to go to New Jersey back in 2016 for a semifinal game. As we passed Lake Champlain, I remember hearing about the monster that supposedly lived there. They called it Champ. I asked the coach if it'd be cool if we stopped at the lake. When he asked why, I said it'd be cool to see Champ. He simply laughed, telling me that my flights of fancy were entertaining, and that was that. As we traveled past, I thought I saw something poke slightly out of the water, piquing my curiosity. Then I heard one of the other kids on the bus say, "Did you see that?" So I knew I wasn't the only one. I talked to a few of my other teammates about it, and they told me they had never heard of Champ and didn't believe that there was a monster there. In other words, they thought I was lying or crazy when I told them about it. During the game, I was so distracted, I couldn't do anything correctly. All that ran through my mind was Champ and whatever I saw out on the water. The game got so bad that I had to sit on the bench. I decided to keep my thoughts to myself. We ended up winning the game, then won the game the following day, making us the champions. As we victoriously went by Lake Champlain again on the way back, we were all gloating about the trophy and admiring our medals when someone on the bus said once again, "Guys, you have to see this." We all turned to look out the window, even our coach did, and we all saw the same thing. I doubt it was a mass hallucination. There was a large creature in the water. I would say probably 15 feet long and brown in color. It had a really long neck and a small head. The bus driver immediately pulled over and snapped a few pictures on his camera. The other players took out their iPhones and started to videotape it, but I stood in silence, my mouth hanging open. We were all too stunned to speak. We eventually shook off the shock after it submerged again, and we didn't see it come back up. My teammates still have the video on their phones, and the bus driver has his pictures. Sadly, I didn't have anything to record it on. What I do have is my memory. The crazy thing is that, though it was all the way out on the lake, it scared me. Something that big, that bizarre coming out of the water. I would never want to find myself out there with it. Whenever I look at the water, I ask myself, what's waiting in there that we've never seen before? The Lochness Monster's Cousin from Kunoichi. Location: Scotland. It was only a few weeks ago that I went to my grandparents' cottage next to the loch in Scotland. I'll never forget what I saw there. I'm 15 years old. It was winter break from school, in America anyway, and my family was on our way to visit my grandparents for Christmas. The cottage was small but homey. It could barely contain all of us. There were 3 bedrooms in the cottage and the basement, which had a small room in the corner. The day after we flew there, we got settled in. It was already very late when we got to the cottage. After I put my clothes in a tiny dresser, I asked my uncle to take me out onto the loch. It was a little cold, but the lake hadn't frozen over yet, so we were still able to go. My uncle took me on the little motorboat to a small island in the middle of the small loch that my grandparents own. I overheard how, since it's Christmas Eve, all the stores had been closed down in town, so we'd have to go hunting instead. My dad stayed behind since he had a cold at the time. Anyway, when we made it to the island after about 15 minutes, Uncle Connor tied the boat to the dock, and we set up our supplies in the little hunting cabin. Uncle Connor sent me out to set up some traps. When he came out of the little hunting cabin, he was carrying a 12 gauge. I had mine with me already. We went a little deeper into the woods, soon coming upon the hunting stand that we'd be using. We were out there for a few hours before it began to snow. I had gotten a rabbit already. Uncle Connor had bagged two. Once we saw the snow, we hurried back to the cabin to get our gear, then head back to the cottage. By the time we made it back to the cabin and checked the traps, the boat had frozen in place. The ice was thin, but we didn't see the need to get hypothermia trying to get it unstuck. We went back to the cabin to stay the night. I called my dad to let him know where we were. We put the game we caught in the freezer while Uncle Connor went to get some firewood from the pile on the porch. It was almost dark, so there wasn't any point in hunting some more. We had our leftovers from lunch for dinner, played some board games, then read some books until we got tired. There were two rooms, the game room and the bedroom. Uncle Connor got the bed since he had a bad back, and I laid in the floor. Luckily, we had 3 sleeping bags. I was just drifting off to sleep when I heard the sound of some banging. I thought a critter got onto the boat outside, or something was messing around with it, so I got up, put on my jacket, then went to the door to turn on the porch light. What I thought I saw out there, it immediately shocked me. It was some sort of animal with a long, slimy black neck. Its eyes were huge, one on either side of its head. It opened its mouth, showing off long, serrated teeth. The body was fat, with 2 large flippers in the front and 2 smaller ones in the back. It looked similar to a plesiosaur. I blinked and looked again, to see nothing there, but the boat was left badly damaged. It hadn't been a trick of the light. I saw a ripple from the corner of my eye, just in time to see something's head duck under the water. Down at my feet, there were sliding tracks from the animal. I went inside, a little shaken, and tried to go back to sleep. In the morning, I saw that the ice on the loch had melted. Uncle Connor was making breakfast of some goose eggs he found nearby. He hadn't seen the boat yet, apparently. I went to the game room where there was a little stove that Uncle Connor was cooking on. I said to him, Did you see the boat?" "What's that?" he asked me. I heard a noise last night. I went to check it, and I think I saw something damaging the boat." He cursed and quickly went to check it. He needed to know if we could get back to the cottage, but the oars had been chewed up, so they were too splintered. Uncle Connor had his phone on him, so he called my dad. About an hour later, he showed up at the dock. Luckily, my grandparents had 3 boats. Anyway, my dad had brought some rope so we could pull the damaged boat back to shore on the other side. We get back to the cottage a little after noon and played in the snow while the women were in the kitchen making Christmas dinner with the animals me and my uncle hunted. We have a small family. It's just my parents, my grandparents, my uncle and his wife and kids. We had a delicious dinner, and after dinner we opened presents. Later that night, we were telling stories, and my dad said that his favorite story growing up was the one about Nessie's cousin. I was familiar with this. It was my least favorite story of all the ones I'd ever heard, but my father started to tell it to us. Once there was a farmer down in the lowlands. He lived a little ways away from the loch, but he went there every day to be by himself and pray. One day after a hard day's work, he went down to the dock to pray like he always did. He accidentally fell asleep in his boat, and when he woke up, It was dark. He was about to get up to go home when he heard a scary noise. It sounded like something between a gurgle of water and a growl. He was cautious because on the news he had heard about disappearances near the docks every night. He got up and peeked over the side, but he didn't see anything. He thought maybe it was just a seal or another animal, and he walked over to get off the boat. The small boat rocked as if something had butted against it, and the farmer landed on his bum. He thought it was just a rough wave and got off the boat. He walked to the end of the dock to gaze at the full moon when he saw a ripple in the water. The farmer thought it was a large fish, so he was walking away when he heard that same gurgle growl noise that had woke him up. He turned around to see a long shadow rise out of the loch, maybe 6 meters in front of him. It was 2.5 meters tall and 5 meters long. It looked like a gigantic seal with a stretched neck. "Nessie," he called. "Nessie, is that you? How glad I am that I'm one of the lucky people that you show yourself to."
"Lucky,"
replied the monster.
"Why are you lucky? I'm not Nessie, I am Shadow. I am one with the Loch. No one may see me until they are soon to perish,"
the monster called back. Then, before the farmer could react, Shadow, the fearsome Loch monster, snapped up the farmer in his mouth. All that was left behind were his boots. On every last full moon of the year, a person goes missing. The last place that person is often seen is the docks, and on the dock, you'll find a pair of boots from the missing person. That's when a teapot whistled in the cottage and everyone jumped. My dad is an exceptional storyteller, so every time someone hears this story, it puts them on edge. We continued with more and more stories well into the night. At around 12:30, everyone went to bed. I was up watching a cartoon though, when I needed to use the loo. I turned off the TV because I was done watching it. I would go to bed when I was done. The bathroom was the closest room in the cottage to the loch. I had flushed the toilet and was washing my hands when I heard a sound. It was the sound. That sound like a gurgle and a growl mixed. I remember thinking, no, it's just my imagination. Dad scared me with that story, he does it every time. I hurried and finished up. I was walking out of the restroom when the sound came again. Once more spooked, I quickly reminded myself that I was simply being childish. It's only a kid's story, a story to keep them away from the loch at night. To face my fears, I went down to the basement to grab a flashlight. When I came up, I went to the door that led to the dock. I opened it and went outside, making sure not to shut the door behind me. I closed my eyes and breathed. I can't believe I'm going to do this, I thought to myself. I opened my eyes to look up at the sky. To my discomfort, it was a full moon, and that would make it the last full moon of the year. "Quit scaring yourself," I said. "It's just a kid's story." I walked cautiously down to the dock, stopping when I was maybe a meter from the edge. I saw something ripple through the water out of the corner of my eye. I backed up to the beginning of the dock because I didn't want to be at the edge of it. In front of me there was another ripple, a big one. I didn't like where this was going. I stayed put though, because I was going to prove to myself that it wasn't real. The story that has haunted me for most of my childhood is just that, a story. I saw something further out in the loch then. Another ripple, a moving ripple. One that was coming closer and closer, until it stopped a few meters in front of the dock. I saw a head emerge from the water, then a long neck. I was behind a tree at this point, scared. I was scanning the yard. When it got to the tree that I was hiding behind, it paused. I was whimpering like a baby, praying that it wouldn't get me. The thing had long serrated teeth as long as my finger. Its skin was black as the night, so were its eyes. But the scariest part was, it acted intelligent. The way it looked at me, the way it moved. It almost looked like it was smiling. Then suddenly, a loud bang rang out from the direction of the cottage. The monster seemed to jerk back, in pain, then quickly fled into the water. I fell to my knees, petrified. I felt my dad wrap his arms around me not moments later. He hugged me tightly, telling me that that story was a warning, and that I did the exact thing I was warned not to do. I felt his tears falling on my cheek as he asked me to never do that again. I stuttered, "I won't, Dad," to him. I stayed inside the cottage for the remainder of the trip. The Loch Lomond Demon, from JustJames. Location: Scotland. My family owns a small cottage on the shores of Loch Lomond in Scotland. It's a small dry stone cottage with a thatched roof, supposedly built at the end of the 1800s. Our favorite thing to do in the winter months is drive the 3 hours up there, sit by the fire and relax. But I don't think after what happened last time that I'll ever be able to sleep there in peace. It was February 2018. The beast from the east had been wreaking havoc on the whole of the UK for weeks, and snow was everywhere by the time we reached the cottage. The shores of the loch were slightly frozen, but it wasn't cold enough yet for all the waters to freeze over. Having been in the cottage for a few hours, the darkness had completely enveloped the shore, and a fine mist sat upon the icy waters of the loch. My little brother wanted to go out and run around in the thick snow that was falling from the dark sky, so my mom made me go out and make sure he didn't hurt himself. We wrapped up warm and went out into the biting air, the snow falling thick and fast. The once fine fog had now thickened to the point where seeing 5 feet in front of you was not an easy task. One thing led to another, and we ended up throwing snow and ice at each other. In an attempt to escape my ruthless snowballs, my brother ran out into the fog. I called for him to come back, but there was no response. Then I felt a snowball hit me. "You cheeky sod," I shouted at him before racing into the fog after him. "I'm coming, Sam," I called, until I felt my shoes fill with cold water. Before I realized it, my whole foot was submerged, and my brother was nowhere to be seen. Then another snowball hit me in the head, then another and another, all of them with force greater than that of an 8-year-old. I wiped the snow from my eyes and opened them to see 2 glowing red eyes a couple of feet in front of me. They were perched atop a dark silhouette with a circular mouth and pointed teeth. The size of its mouth was impossibly big. I screamed and ran back to the cottage, slipping and smacking my knees as I went. I threw open the wooden door to see my whole family sit around the fire. My brother had been home since I lost sight of him. To this day, I have no idea what the heck I saw, but I hope I never see it again. After all, February isn't far away. Did I run into it? From G-Man223. Location: Minnesota. I grew up in a small township in Minnesota, just north of the metro in between the Twin Cities, what we call up north. The first thing I want to share with you is a story a friend had recently told me about one of my other friends who lived in the trailer park about 2 miles away from me. We were fishing at our honey hole down a dirt road with a camp called Ajawa. I got this story from a conversation started by my coworker who had an experience there. He and I were camping on the north shore of Lake Superior with another coworker. That's when he shared this story with me. He was a Boy Scout pretty much his entire childhood, and he had been to Camp Ajawa, which was situated right on Linwood Lake. He said he was around 8 or 9 years old, with a group of a dozen other scouts when this happened. Now, I don't remember everything he told me, but I do remember him saying that they were all in the cabin during the day, with no counselor. He said some of the guys freaked out. They had seen a black figure outside the cabin, and when my coworker saw it for himself, he noticed that it was staring directly at him. Things in the cabin started to shake, and they all ran outside freaking out and looking for the counselors. After I relayed this story to my friend, he had remarked that Garrett, our friend from the trailer park, had a similar experience. When Garrett was younger, he was out playing in the woods when he suddenly saw a little Indian girl who asked him to follow her. Wanting to play, Garrett followed her over to the Ajawa and into the cabin, and once he got there, he heard her in the closet asking him to come inside. Well, he went in and said that the door closed and the entire closet shook. When he managed to get the door open, he ran home absolutely terrified. I'm creeped out thinking about these stories, and after a little thought, I do remember having an odd night back when I was 12 or 13. My friend Nathan and I were having a sleepover in the shack my dad had built in my backyard. It was pretty cozy. It had wood flooring, a big 55-inch TV, and a few couches with a pull-up bar. But this was not enough to keep us entertained. So around my parents' bedtime, we slipped out the door and decided to head to a beach a mile down the road, which was near Ajawa. It was about midnight when we began our journey. Being young, there is a curfew, so as we headed down the highway, we'd have to jump into the ditches to hide whenever a car drove by. We were past the halfway point getting there. We started seeing headlights about a mile away from us, coming around a corner, so we scrambled to a good ditch on the property of an old farmhouse. As we got into the ditch, the car came into full view, so we laid down. As we were lying there waiting for the car to pass, we heard a little girl who sounded no further than 10 feet away from us. She said hi. I looked at my friend in disbelief. It was 1 a.m. right next to the highway. There was no way a little girl would be here right now. We quickly got up after the car passed by and saw no one. The farmhouse was 50 or so feet away and someone was watching TV there, but there were no other signs of people. We kept on our way, albeit creeped out at what had just happened, and made it to the dirt road leading down to the beach. We walked for 2 minutes or so, and as soon as we came into view of the beach, my friend froze. I looked at the beach, and we saw this thing with 6 legs standing in the water. It was about the size of a moose, but we don't have moose this far down south. We stood there for about 30 seconds staring at it, without saying a word to each other. We both walked backwards, keeping our eyes fixated on it. As soon as we lost sight of it, we ran, panicking all the way down to the highway, and walked back to the shack in disbelief. I don't know what that thing was or why we heard that little girl, but Linwood is definitely a creepy place. Keep an eye on the water. Not all that is sinister washes up on the shore. Some of it remains in the depths of our lakes, waiting, watching, wanting. When you walk too close to the water's edge, you often don't realize how absolutely scrumptious you look to the hungry things below. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want a chance to have your story read on the show, share it with us at darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/darknessprevails, or go to teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails, or simply click the shop button below if you're on YouTube to check out my merchandise. As usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video, about 5 alone at night horror stories. Angel Io says, "Can you buy me 10 nightlights? I'll do you one even better. I'll hang you a disco ball in your room. It'll keep you safe in the most fabulous way possible." Ruby Trujillo says, "The stressful day I had, this is the best part of it. I'm glad it could help. I know when I'm stressed out, reading these stories and finishing up videos for you guys really helps a lot." Creator Comics says, "Blee blue blah. Hey, watch your mouth, buddy. This is a Christian server." Lemon Worshipper says, "Does your demon Scott like chicken nuggets dipped in the souls of the innocent?" Nah, he's more of a ketchup kind of guy. And Ozzy Lara says, "Hey Darkness, can you do some stalker stories? What's so creepy about guys at Walmart putting things on shelves?" Bad pun, I know. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. More scary stories are coming up soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.